Awesome.
Okay, great. So Sam can then host this once we're done on her website. Right at the end, I'll give you a slide that has a lot of further information you can get, including a free copy of my book, which you can download from my website for free as an attendee at this webinar. And there's also tons of other information on my website that can help you to cut your home's carbon footprint to zero. It has my email address and all kinds of other things on there. So it also has a YouTube link to a previously recorded version of this webinar. So one way or another, you can either go to the previous version or you can go to the version that we're doing tonight that Sam is going to be recording for us. All right, are we back to having the opening slide on the screen? Yes, okay, great. So so thank you everyone. Hello, good evening. Special thanks here this evening to Jessica Williams. Jessica, wave your hand. There she is, it's Jessica Williams from the Duxbury Library, who's the host tonight, and Sam, who's her fellow co-host tonight. And there'll be plenty of time for questions during this presentation. The presentation is split up into 4 big sections, one for heat pumps, one for insulation.
Yeah. Do you have to go to the bathroom?
One for triple glazed windows and one for solar panels. And after each section, we'll take a couple of questions from the chat box. So if you've got questions, please type them into the chat box while I'm presenting. And then Sam will read those out to me after each section. And then when we get to the end of the presentation, we'll open up for all kinds of questions. And if you've got any kind of question about how to cut your carbon footprint or dealing with contractors or what's it going to cost, I can stay on as long as it takes to answer everybody's questions tonight. So if you have a question, you will get an answer for it tonight if you stay on throughout the Q&A period. So I'm going to be speaking mostly this evening about our own experience cutting our carbon footprint to zero and making a 15% return on investment by doing so. Now, that 15% was calculated about 4 years ago. I'm sure you're all painfully aware that the price of heating oil and natural gas is now almost double what it was just a couple of years ago. And the price of electricity, if you're on Eversource electricity and probably National Grid as well, just went up 25%. This is all because of the increase in the cost of natural gas, which directly affects the cost of natural gas. It also directly affects the cost of heating oil and propane. And it also affects the cost of electricity because natural gas is burned to make electricity. So all the numbers I'm showing you in here are at old and much lower prices for electricity and for natural gas and heating oil. So if you to do this all over again at today's prices, you'd make even more money, save even more money than I have been doing on mine. So what worked spectacularly well for me over the last few years will work even better for you today. So let me get on with it. So I mentioned the Q&A function, how we're going to use that. You write in the chat box, and then Sam can read out the questions when I get to the end of each section. So here's the summary of what happened on our house. Now, when I did this, I did not set out to go zero. I didn't even think it was possible. I just wanted to cut our carbon footprint. Cutting it to zero was a surprise. So if you look at the chart here, our carbon footprint from heating, that's heating oil in our house, and electricity was about 30 to 35 tons. That's an awful lot of carbon dioxide every year. And then at the end of 2016, I added solar panels on my roof and heat pumps to replace our ancient and decrepit air conditioning units. They did not replace our furnace. That is a common misperception. Heat pumps replace air conditioning units, not furnaces. But that combination of the solar and the heat pumps cut our carbon footprint about 2/3, about 20 tons per year, cutting it to about 10 tons per year. At the end of 2017, I then added insulation to the roof of the house and to the ceiling of the basement, and triple glazed windows to replace our ancient and falling apart 1970s era double glazed and some single glazed windows. And that cut our carbon footprint a further 50%, another 5 tons to about 5 tons. And this surprised me. I was able to cut it so much with really fairly modest effort. And then I realized, well, maybe if I push this a little bit further, I can actually get it to zero. And so in the middle of 2018, I added extra solar panels on the roof of our garage. And that cut, so now I have 2 arrays, one on the roof of my house right above my head here, and one on the roof of our garage. And together they make enough electricity to cut our entire electricity bill to zero. And that is our entire energy bill now, because we no longer burn heating oil for electricity for heating. We use electricity from our solar panels power our heat pumps to heat our house. And this cut our carbon footprint to just slightly less than 0 in 2019. It's been there the same way in 2020, 2021. And so we have cut 35 tons of carbon dioxide out of the emissions to the atmosphere. Now that is the equivalent to taking 10 gasoline-powered cars off the road. One house, 10 cars. This is huge. Cutting carbon emissions also cuts emissions of things like sulfur dioxide, nitric oxide, and particulates, better known as soot, all better known as pollution, all of which cause asthma. So you can improve your family's health too, as well as cutting your carbon emissions and cutting your bills. Now, what was even more of a surprise to me was how much money I was saving. That in addition to the 35 tons of carbon dioxide I've cut out, here's the same chart for the heating bill. This is in dollars. So our heating bill, this is the combined heating oil plus electricity. Heating oil was about $7,000. Electricity was about $4,000 back in 2014 or so, about $11,500 total. You can see it follows the carbon emissions, cut heavily in 2017 with the addition of solar and heat pumps, cut again with the addition of insulation and triple glazed windows, and then with those extra solar panels in the middle of 2018, cutting it to below 0 for 2019. So that's 35 tons of carbon dioxide gone. That's 35 tons each year. It's every year, and it's forever. And $11,000 each year, every year, forever. That's a 15% return on my investment. Again, each year, every year, and forever. Now, you may be wondering, well, Dave's got a big house in Dover, and Dover's one of the wealthiest towns in Massachusetts. Is this going to work for me? Yes, is the answer. One homeowner who's applied my approach is earning a 46% per year return on his investment by cutting his carbon footprint 38%. This man lives alone in a small house on a small income. I've helped about 20 different homeowners to save money by cutting their carbon emissions. This approach worked on big houses. I've worked on 14,000 square foot houses. I've worked on 1,500 square foot houses. That's a big house, small house. I've worked on new houses. I've worked on brand new construction, a house that wasn't even built yet. I worked on the design of that. And I've worked on old houses. I've worked on 2 houses, old New England colonial houses from farmhouses from 1810. This works on old houses, new houses, big houses, small houses. It works for owner occupiers, people who own their houses, and for landlords and for tenants. I can talk about that a bit later on. So this is big. This delivers what people call the triple bottom line. It delivers for the people, for the planet, and for the profit. 0 pollution for the health of the people, 0 carbon for the planet, and 0 bills for your own profit. This webinar will show you how to do it. Just a bit of background about me. I'm a Brit, if you can't tell by my accent. I came here in 1989 to go to business school, met this girl, fell in love, and I've been here ever since. I have a degree in physics from Oxford University and an MBA from Harvard Business School. In my career, I founded and I was CEO of 2 different biotech companies. I used to say I was retired, but I went back to being CEO of the biotech company called Biostage at the end of last year. But previously, I left there in about 2015 after a nasty road accident that nearly killed me in the summer of 2014. And it was while I was at home recovering from that accident, I researched how to cut my carbon footprint and set about doing the 4 things I said earlier: the heat pumps, the insulation, the triple glazed window, and the solar panels. So now both my house and my swimming pool have 0 carbon footprints. I'm saving over $11,000 a year on the house and over $3,000 on the swimming pool. I wrote 2 books, 0 Carbon Home, 0 Carbon Pool, about how to do it. All of you will be getting 0 Carbon Home for free at the end of this webinar. I don't work for or get paid by any manufacturer, installer, or any town. I do this on my spare time, which I don't have much of these days. I have no financial conflicts of interest other than selling the book, which I do sell for $25 or $15, but you're all getting it for free. And I do consult, or I should say I used to consult the homeowners who wanted to go 0, but I don't really do this anymore because I've got a full-time job again. And my advice is based on my experience, but neither me nor the company 0 Carbon LLC is giving investment, tax, legal, or financial advice, nor providing any kind of guarantee of results. Now, I'm not going to tell you this evening that you need to eat vegetarian, turn down your thermostat, wear a cardigan like Jimmy Carter did, bike to work, have fewer children, or vote for Al Gore. In fact, I don't care who you vote for. I don't care whether you believe climate change is a Chinese hoax or an existential risk to humanity. I'm just going to talk about how to save money by cutting your carbon footprint. I think we can all agree on saving money. In fact, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to show you what we did that worked. Now, it may be coincidence or perhaps destiny. Our family name really is Green. I'm not making it up. I got it from my father. I'm not making it up, just like I'm not making up anything else in this presentation either. So how did I gather all this data that underlies the conclusions here in this presentation? Well, mostly, I started with our house and I expanded to other people's houses. Our house is a 2-story, 5,400 square foot house that's bigger than average, built in 1974, and has standard construction of 2x4 wall studs with fiberglass in between the cavities. And before we went zero, it had no energy efficiency features whatsoever. In fact, it was a pretty energy inefficient house. And we live in Dover, Massachusetts, which has 5,800 heating degree days. A heating degree day is a measure of how cold it gets in the wintertime. And 5,800 is typical across New England, all the way across the Midwest, and even into Northern California. Every day for over 2 years, I measure the heating oil use and the electricity used by home. Yes, that's right. That's the kind of super geek I am. As the physicist in me, I actually like doing this kind of stuff. And I used that data to build an energy model of our home. This had an 80% R squared. R squared is a statistical measure that tells you how accurate a model is at predicting the real results. And 80% is very good for a model like this. It predicted our full year bills to within about 10%. That was Gen 1 of the model. I'm on about Gen 5 now. And it's now accurate about 5%. And I use that energy model to make financial projections. It's the standard way any MBA student would be trained to do this, of the changes in the cash flows based off reduction in the heating bill, reduction in the electricity bill, etc., and the investment needed to get there. And that gave me the cash flow based net present value, a standard financial term which measures how much profit you make on investment, IRR, or the internal rate of return, which is also the return on investment, like 5%, 10%, 15% per year, and the payback period in years, which is how long it takes for the savings to pay back the investment you made in the first place. So I measured the cut every time I added one of the Fab Four, which is the heat pumps, the insulation, the triple glazed windows, and the solar panels. So I measured the cut in the energy and the cut in the dollars each time I did it. And I've used a similar method on our rental property here in Dover, and about 20 clients spread over Massachusetts and New York states. So you may be asking yourself, why now? This sounds like kind of a miracle that Dave has pulled off here. And it's really very simple when you reflect on it. The technologies have got much better. The technologies of insulation, heat pumps, solar panels, triple glazed windows all got substantially better in just the last few years. And in addition, the subsidies from government are very generous. And so you can, by following these examples, cut the carbon emissions from your home to zero, save thousands of dollars a year on your heating bills and electricity bills, and make a good return on your investment. We've done it, and it works on new houses too, and for renters as well. So how do we do this? We added heat pumps, insulation, triple glazed windows, and solar panels, which I call the Fab Four. Yes, I'm a Brit, and I do like the Beatles, who are, of course, the real Fab Four. And it's easy to remember this because the real Fab Four had lots of hits. Heat pumps, insulation, triple glazed windows, solar panels. So it makes it easy to remember as well. So how do we go zero and make money? We install the Fab Four, and we've got all the tax breaks and subsidies. Now, let me cover each one of these in turn. And after each section, I'll take 2 questions or 2 or 3 questions that Sam will feed me out from the chat box. Then at the end, we'll open up for regular questions and answers. So first, heat pumps. So heat pumps, this was the biggest single cause of reducing our carbon footprint. About halved it, about 20 tons of carbon dioxide per year, saving us almost $3,000 a year. Remember, these are the old prices. If we did this today, it would be almost double that. And for this, of course, the investment would be the same. The investment today would still be $26,000 or thereabouts. Our investment was $26,000, but your savings now will be almost double because of the increase in the price of heating oil and natural gas and propane since then. So for us, it took about 9 years to pay for itself. Today, it would be probably more like 4 or 5 years. Our return on investment is about 9%. That's 9% after tax and index for inflation. Now, the after tax bit means you'd have to compare this to an investment in, say, the stock market or the bond market. That's a taxable investment, making almost double that, perhaps 18%. And of course, this number is now about half what it would be today, given the increase in price of heating oil. So what the heat pumps I'm talking about here are air-sourced heat pumps, not geothermal. Geothermal is a different type of heat pump that takes the heat from the water in the ground rather than the heat from the air outside. Geothermal works. It works very well in New England, but we had a quote for it. It was 4 times. It was $98,000, 4 times the cost of doing the air source heat pumps, and that's because you need to drill wells, usually quite deep wells, to get down to that water, to get enough water to to be your source of heat for heating the house. So although geothermal makes great energy sense, it is one of those things I found did not make good financial sense. What I found made very good financial sense was air-sourced heat pumps. So let me show you what ours look like. Here they are. And if you're saying to yourself, wow, they look just like air conditioning units, you're right, they do. And in fact, they replaced our 1980s era air conditioning units that were terribly inefficient, and eventually one of them broke down. That's what precipitated this whole move to a zero carbon footprint when one of the air conditioning units broke and had to be replaced. So air conditioning units heat pumps replace your air conditioning units physically. They also cool your house in summertime, just like an AC unit. And when they cool your house, they cool with the same efficiency as a regular air conditioning unit. But when they heat the house, in the wintertime, the circuit is reversed, and instead of pumping heat out, it pumps heat in. And when they're in that mode, the heating mode, they heat with 2.5 times the efficiency of a furnace or boiler. They cool with the same efficiency as an air conditioning unit. So let me show you how this works. Heat pumps often confuse people, but most people are actually very familiar with heat pumps, even though they don't think so, because your refrigerator in your kitchen is a heat pump. Your refrigerator moves heat, or removes heat, if you like, from the milk inside the fridge, and it moves that heat out the back of the refrigerator, where if you look at the back of the fridge, you've got that long S-shaped row of thin metal pipes. That's where the heat that was in your milk is dumped to the back of the refrigerator, and therefore into the air of your kitchen. So your refrigerator is actually warming up the air in your kitchen. I remember when I was a kid, my mum used to start trays of seedlings up on top of the refrigerator because it was warm up there, and the seedlings would germinate faster. Now, imagine that on a bigger scale, the scale of your house. Then this is called an AC unit. It's removing the heat from inside your house and pumping it outside. So this makes your house cooler and the outside air warmer. So if you put your hand over the top of an air conditioning unit in summertime, it's really hot. It may be 80 degrees out in the air temperature, but over the air conditioning unit, it's 110 degrees. That's all the heat that was inside your house that has been removed to the outside, cooling down your house and heating up the air outside. Now imagine reversing that in the wintertime. Now your heat pump is pushing heat into the house, making your house warmer, but the necessary effect must be that it cools down the outside air. And this is where it gets a bit counterintuitive for people, because it's cold out in wintertime. How can there be heat in the air? Well, a physicist like me will tell you there's plenty of heat in the air as long as it's above absolute zero, which is really, really, really cold. And you can take some of that heat and put it into your house, but the necessary effect is your house, the outside air gets colder still. Let me show you how this works. This is me measuring the temperature over our heat pumps in the middle of wintertime. On the left, it's me measuring the temperature of the inlet side. This is just the outside air temperature in wintertime, and it's 4.7 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a very cold winter day. You can see the snow on the ground. I'm wearing ski gloves. On the right-hand side, you can see me measuring the temperature over the top of the heat pump on the exhaust side of the heat pump. And you can see it's a staggeringly low, minus 19.6 degrees Fahrenheit. It's much, much colder. It's 25 degrees Fahrenheit colder than the air on the outside. That is already very cold because it's a cold winter day. So this is what happens with a heat pump. It takes heat from the outside air, making that air colder, and pushes that heat into your house, making your house warmer. Now, what I just showed you is on our house where I'm sitting right now, and that we had air conditioning and forced hot air conditioning and forced hot air heating before we put the heat pumps in. Not all houses have the ductwork to do this, and this is at our rental property, which is actually next door to us, and there is no basement and no attic at this place, and it's got like a concrete floor, and there's no air conditioning. There was no air conditioning before we added it with the heat pumps. And you can see the outdoor unit there. These ones are made by Mitsubishi. The previous ones I showed you were made by Bosch. And the indoor unit, you can see there is ceiling mounted. Usually these are mounted on the wall or sometimes on the floor. I prefer the look of the ceiling mounted units. They're a bit more inconspicuous, and paid a bit extra to have these ceiling mounted units, but you can do this. I think it looks better, and it was worth it for this place, which you can see has kind of an oldie sort of feel, and it didn't look very good with the that box on the wall. So if you don't have ductwork, this is one of your options. There is another option, which is if it's a two-story house, you can put some ductwork in the basement, some ductwork in the attic, and get airflow to both rooms, but both floors. without having to add ductwork through the walls, which is a really expensive thing to do on a house. So let me just summarize this, and at the end, if you've got a question, type into the chat box now, and Sam will ask me the questions in a couple of minutes. So for details on the subsidies that are available and the zero interest loan, please see chapter 2 of the book, which you'll get at the end. I don't recommend geothermal, as I mentioned, or ground source heat pumps. They do work, they work very well, but they're just very expensive. Now, the subsidies for geothermal have gone up recently. The federal tax credit of 26% applies to geothermal. It does not apply to air source heat pumps. Don't know why, but it doesn't. And the Mass Save program will pay you up to $2,000 per ton. A typical house would need, say, 6 to 8 tons of cooling capacity. So you'd get $2,000 a ton. So if you get all these things, and if you've got any chance to get the wells drilled for cheap, maybe you've got a friend in the trade, then geothermal can start to make sense. It definitely makes energy sense. It usually, though, does not make financial sense, even with these subsidies, even with these huge subsidies. It's still, for most people, much cheaper to put in air source heat pumps, not geothermal. Air source heat pumps, I showed you working with forced hot air systems. They also work with radiators or forced hot water systems. This is a common occurrence in many people's houses. They have forced hot water radiators today, and they want to just put a heat pump in. You can do this. They're made by different companies, though. The companies that make the air source heat pumps used for forced hot air systems are the same people that make air conditioning units. It's like American Standard, Trane, Mitsubishi, Bosch, Fujitsu. Those kind of people who make air conditioning units also make air source heat pumps for forced hot air systems. The companies that make air source heat pumps for forced hot water systems are different, and there are at least 3 of them. There is Daikin, D-A-I-K-I-N, there is Jaga, J-A-G-A, and there is Spacepak, S-P-A-C-E-P-A-K, and they make the specialized air source heat pump to forced hot water systems. But they do exist, and you can get them. I've not done this myself, so I don't have any recommendations, but they do exist, and you can get them. They also work with existing ductwork. If you have existing ductwork for an AC system, but you have forced hot water radiators, you can use that ductwork for heating and cooling. They also work for swimming pools. I have a swimming pool, I replaced the propane furnace on that with a air source heat pump. It works very well. And they work for hot water tanks. I have my hot water is heated by a heat pump hot water tank, sometimes known as a hybrid hot water tank in the trade. These are very efficient, and when you run them off solar panels, they're almost free. Now, leave your furnace in place. Heat pumps replace AC units. They do not replace furnaces. Very few houses in New England are going to be able to keep the house at 70 degrees year-round with heat pumps alone. It can be done, but you need very good levels of insulation and very good windows. And most existing houses are not capable of getting there. If you're building new construction, you can get there without having a furnace as a backup. But leave your furnace in place, whether it's for a forced hot water radiator system or a forced hot air system, and then you'll have a backup heating system should the heat pumps ever fail. And on those super cold days, you will still burn some fossil fuel to keep the house at 70 degrees. We burn about 100 gallons of heating oil per year, down from about 3,000 gallons a year before we put the Fab Four in. But the carbon footprint of that 100 gallons is more than offset by the excess solar power that we export to the grid, which displaces fossil fuel burning generators on the grid. So it has a negative carbon footprint. I also highly recommend getting multiple quotes. There are some installers who will just try you with a very high price up front, just see if you go for it. So I definitely recommend getting multiple quotes. So Sam, let's just stop here for a minute. And if you could just take a couple of questions out of the chat. If we do more than a couple, it will throw us off on time. I want to stay on time this evening. Any other questions, you can just ask me at the end.
Great. Okay. So you might have touched on this already about like the ductwork and stuff. Someone asked, how do we put heat pumps in if our house has hot water baseboard heat without air conditioning or ductwork? Did you touch on that? You might have.
I did, but it's worth repeating because this is a very common situation in New England houses, which have forced hot water radiators for distributing the heat around the house. You can get air source heat pumps specifically designed to work with those systems. The only problem is they're not distributed by the people who do the air conditioning work. So if you call your local HVAC contractor, there'll almost certainly be a Mitsubishi dealer or a Train dealer or an American Standard dealer, and they won't be a dealer for the three manufacturers of air source heat pump to baseboard radiator systems, which is Daikin, D-A-I-K, I think it's I-N, it might be E-N, Jaga, J-A-G-A, and Spacepak, S-P-A-C-E-P-A-K. All these names are on my website if you want to go and look this up, so you don't need to write it all down. But those three companies don't distribute through the same dealers that distribute the air source heat pumps that are made by the air conditioning unit companies. So you have to look for them. So just go to Google those names, and find out the local distributor for you if you have the baseboard radiators, because that will probably be the best solution for you. Unless you want to do the mini split, the ductless mini split units, which you can also do. But if you've got the baseboard radiators, I don't really see the point in adding other big bits of machinery inside your house. You're better off just going with one of these air source heat pumps that are designed to work with radiators. And again, just leave your furnace in place, because it's unlikely that the heat pumps alone will be able to keep your house at 70 degrees on days when it's bitterly cold out in the wintertime. Our heat pumps can keep our house at 70 degrees down to about 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And we found the same thing at our rental unit with those Mitsubishi mini split units. They can keep the house at 70 degrees all the way down to about 20 degrees Fahrenheit. But on a few days of the year, we do get those 0 degree or 5 degree days. And then I'd get up in the morning and find the house is at about 65 degrees Fahrenheit, and no one in my family likes that. So then we turn on the furnace just for usually an hour or so, gets the temperature back up. Now the sun's up, the day starts to warm up, and the heat pumps can take it from there. But we do burn about 100 gallons of heating oil every year, and I would not take the risk of taking out your fossil fuel furnace and going with heat pumps only. I would just leave it in place. When you install these new heat pumps, they come with new thermostats, and the thermostats integrate your fossil fuel furnace with your heat pump. So basically what happens is an algorithm, and the algorithm keeps the heat pumps going until they can't keep up anymore, and then it turns on the fossil fuel furnace. So you don't even have to think about this. It just happens with the new thermostats.
Great. Thank
Did that
you.
answer your question? I guess you wouldn't know.
Yeah, great. I think there are a few other questions from earlier, but I'll save those for the end. So I think we're ready to learn about the next Fab Four. Okay,
terrific. So here are my questions you should ask a heat pump installer. I'm not going to read this out, it'll take too long. These are on my website. When we get to the end, I'll show you the website address. You can download all my slides, and including this slide, which these are just the questions you should ask a heat pump installer before getting a quote. Let's go on to the second part of HITS, the Fab Four, that's insulation. Here's the results for insulation on our house. This cut our carbon footprint about 16% or 7 tons per year, saving us more money than we saved from the heat pumps, $2,900 versus $2,800. The investment, though, was tiny. It only cost me about $1,000 to buy the insulation. I installed this myself. I'll show you in just a minute. Pays for itself in the first winter, more than 100% return on investment. So I wish I could invest more of my 401k in insulation. Do much better than my investments in the stock market. So this is a really good way to make money and save money, and cut your carbon emissions. You'll do far more to save the planet from global warming by insulating the ceiling of your basement than by buying an electric vehicle. Insulating the ceiling of your basement has saved us 7 tons a year of carbon dioxide emissions. An EV saves about 2 tons a year compared to a gasoline vehicle. 7 tons for $1,000 or 2 tons for $50,000 for an EV. So it's a much, much better financial decision, and it will cut far more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as well. Here's what we did on our house. We have a flat roof. You can see on the left there, there's 10 inches of pink fiberglass between the roofing rafters, and we added 2 of those boards. Those boards are called iso boards, and they're basically spray foam in a board. It's very easy to handle, very easy just to screw it down to the roofing rafters, and then it's covered with a rubber membrane. So that's about R50. Insulation is measured in R values. More is better. The fiberglass is about R30, and then the 2 layers of iso board about R20. So the whole total is about R50. That is a very well insulated roof. On the right-hand picture, you can see our basement ceiling. That's just regular fiberglass. I pushed that up between the rafters myself, about 12 inches of fiberglass. This is very, very effective. Most people do not insulate the ceiling of their basement, and yet you need the insulation on both the top and the bottom of the house to keep the warmth in the house. Otherwise, the warmth leaks out through the top or through the bottom into the basement and from the basement out into the ground outside. Insulation usually goes hand in hand with air sealing or draft sealing. Air sealing is very cheap and very effective and can cut energy use by 25%. This is the experience of my clients. Also, the Department of Energy says the average house loses about 30% of its heat through gaps and cracks. A major academic study found insulating attics saved 8% of the energy, but insulating and air sealing saved 18% of the energy. So very big effect of air sealing at the same time. Now, Mass Save, most of the people on this call tonight are from Massachusetts. Mass Save is a Massachusetts state program. When they come and insulate your house, they will do the air sealing for free. So you definitely want to get this. Air sealing is very cheap, very effective. And it is not necessary to get to very, very tight levels of air sealing in the house. There's a standard called Passive House, which was originally a German standard for very low energy use houses. And they have a very, very, very low standard for air infiltration, which is 0.6 ACH50. I won't explain what that means right now. Just it's a very low number. I measured this on my house, and my house is 4.6 ACH50. A drafty house is probably around 10 ACH50, and if you're in like an old-fashioned New England colonial farmhouse, it's probably ACH20. So 4.6 is pretty good, but it is nowhere near the levels needed to get passive house certification. This proves once and for all, you do not need to get to passive house levels of air infiltration, which is very expensive to do, in order to get to a zero carbon footprint. It's very expensive to get to the passive house levels because to get this tight a building envelope requires specialized labor. It's not just getting $15, $20 an hour wage labor on a construction site. You need like $60, $70, $80 an hour skilled labor to do this air sealing work. And you'll need a ventilator, and energy recovery ventilators cost about $5,000, which in my opinion is a complete waste of money. Just don't seal it up tight enough that you need to have an energy recovery ventilator in the first place. So insulation, Mass Save will pay 75% of the cost of insulating a house up to $2,000. That's a lot of money. You can do a lot of insulation for $2,000, and they'll pay 100% of the cost of draft sealing. This is for either dense packed cellulose or for fiberglass. They will not pay for spray foam. So insulation is the lowest hanging, ripest fruit in the garden. So please pick it by the bushel. Mass Save will pay for both attic insulation and basement insulation, but it really pays to ask for it because some of the contractors won't do more than they have to get a check on the box they did your house. So for a summary on insulation, for details, more details on which types of insulation to put where, there are many different types of insulation. There are specialist types of insulation for special places in your house. Please read the book. If you don't live in Massachusetts, you can see the subsidies at this website, www.dsireusa.org. DSIRE stands for Database of State Incentives for Renewable Energy, and it's maintained by a university, and it documents all of the subsidy programs in every state of the union. Now, I do not recommend taking off your siding, thickening the walls with insulation and replacing your siding. This does work. It's another one of those techniques that is actually quite common in the green building community or zero carbon community. It will cut your carbon footprint, but it's far too expensive compared to insulating your roof and your basement. So this is another one of those things like geothermal that does make energy sense, but does not make financial sense. We got a quote to do this on our house and had 2 inches of ISO board around the house. It was $150,000. So there's no way that would ever pay for itself within my lifetime. But there are occasions when you can thicken walls, like when you're doing other work around the house, and some of those are listed in the book, and you can read up about that. So we spent about $1,000 insulating the ceiling of our basement, and it saved us over $3,000 a year, and it's cut more carbon dioxide than buying electric vehicles. This is very effective. So Sam, let's just pause here and take another couple of questions about insulation.
Great, thank you. So someone asks, do the hot water radiator / baseboard heat pumps give you cooling in the summer?
Very good question. So I haven't done this myself, so I'm not sure of this answer, but I suspect not. Now, if you go to the websites of the companies that make these systems, some of them claim that they do provide cooling in the summer. But my concern with this is that cooling in the summer causes condensation. And so if you imagine your radiators, which give out heat in the wintertime, now dripping with condensation in the summertime, because they're cooler than the air, and that would lead to puddles of water on your carpets or on your nice hardwood floors. So I don't think this is possible. Now, there are companies who claim that they can do it. They claim that they have a humidity monitor and they never let the air temperature go below the dew point, which is the temperature at which the condensation happens. But I am skeptical. I've never seen this done. If you're going to do this and rely on cool water circulating around your radiators as your air conditioning in summertime, I would recommend going to see somebody's house that's got it already, just so you can check out what's really working. And if you do that, by the way, please let me know, because I'd like to be able to talk to other people about it from real experience. I just don't have the experience of doing this myself, so I can't tell you directly, but I just warn you that you should be asking these questions if a salesman for a air source heat pump to forced hot water heating system tells you that it can do air conditioning as well. I am skeptical, but I'm happy to be persuaded. If someone can show me some examples of installations where they have succeeded in getting good air conditioning in the summertime without getting pools of water on the carpets, I'd be very happy to know about it.
Great, thank you. I think that's all for questions for right now.
Okay, let's carry on then. So the third part of HITS, or the Fab Four, is T triple glazed windows. So the results for us were about 2 tons of carbon dioxide cut about 5% of our carbon footprint, savings about $1,000 a year. Investment was $4,500. Now, this is the additional investment in buying triple glazed windows compared to the cost of buying double glazed windows. We were going to replace our windows with double glazed anyway. That's sort of the standard default for window replacements. And then I started learning about triple glazed windows, and I realized the extra cost of triple glazed is actually very small, because the cost of the glass is a small component of the cost of the window. The cost of the wood in the frame is a much bigger driver of the cost of the window, and then the cost of installing it is almost the same as the cost of buying it. So when you add all that up, the incremental cost of the third panel of glass is actually very low. And that incremental cost, with the incremental savings of triple glazed versus double glazed, works out a payback of about 4.6 years, with a return on investment about 19%, again after tax and indexed for inflation. Now, these are the incremental costs, not the full cost. The full cost of replacing windows is very unlikely to pay for itself within your lifetime, because it's just so expensive to replace windows. So that's why I only recommend you replace your windows if they need to be replaced for some other reason, like they're broken or rotten or falling apart or leaking. Then if you replace them with triple glazed, not double glazed, it will lower your bills more than enough to pay for that additional cost of the triple glazed above the double glazed. Now, if your windows are in good shape, then it makes much more sense to add window inserts, which are much cheaper than replacing the entire window, which I'll show you in just a minute. So these are the windows before we put on our house, before we put in the new triple glazed windows. You can see these are from the 1970s. In the left panel there, you can see the windows misted up because the air seal has broken. And then on the right-hand side, you can see, because the house had shifted slightly as it settled over the years, there was actually a 1-inch gap between the window and the frame, which I sealed over that nice blue duct tape. So our windows are really falling apart. So we're faced with the decision of replacing them, and should we replace them with double glazed or triple glazed? And this is what our new windows look like. I hope you agree with me. They look a lot better than the old ones. Now, these are our homes we're talking about. We're not just talking about the bills and the carbon emissions. We're talking about how they look and feel. And this is our living room. And with those old windows, those old broken windows, the living room was unpleasant to be in at Christmas time. Which is the one time of the year you really want your living room to be a great place to be. It was too cold because we'd get drafts off the windows and drafts through the windows. Some of the windows in the living room are actually single glazed. Some of them were those ancient double glazed windows. And now we've got the triple glazed windows in the windows, and we've added insulation to the ceiling of the basement. This room is much warmer now and doesn't have those cold spots it had in the past. And so we now very happily have Christmas in our living room, which we really struggled to do before. Now, how do triple glazed windows work? Well, here's an illustration of a window sliced through the middle there. There are 3 panes of glass. On the outside, the light is coming from the sun there, made up of ultraviolet light and visible light. The ultraviolet light is reflected away from the window by a coating on that window. That is called a low E or low emissivity coating, and this is often called low E 180 on the outside. That reflects away the infrared light, but does not reflect away the visible light, meaning the visible light comes in and makes your house nice and light without all that heat coming in with all that energy from the ultraviolet light. The ultraviolet light is also the light that fades your photographs and your pictures and your carpets, so you really want to keep it out for many reasons. On the inside, there's a different coating. It's again a low E coating. This time it's called low E I89. And what this does is it reflects the infrared light. So if you're standing in your room in the middle of wintertime, the room is at 70 degrees, your body's at 98, the outside may be at 30 degrees centigrade, 30 degrees Fahrenheit, you're emitting infrared light. That's heat. It's coming off your body, and that's being reflected back from the window by that low E I89 coating on the inside. Reflecting that heat back keeps you warm, keeps you much warmer than if you didn't have that low E I89 coating. So that's what low E coatings are, and they're very good value for money. It's just a few pennies more to have the low E coating put on the window. It's invisible to the naked eye, but it has this wonderful effect of keeping the photograph fading ultraviolet light out and keeping the infrared light inside in the wintertime. So windows like this, low E triple glazed windows, are 8 times better than their single glazed ancestors from the 1970s. Now, it's easy to get carried away with all these technologies here like solar panels and heat pumps, but windows make a huge difference. Low E triple glazed windows are really the unsung heroes of the zero carbon revolution. This is another way of thinking about it. Here's me modeling triple glazed windows. On the left there, you've got me wearing a single t-shirt, and that's like a single glazed window. If I put on a sweater, I've now got a layer of air trapped against my body, and that's like a double glazed window. If I put on 2 sweaters, I've got 2 layers of air. That's like a triple glazed window with 2 layers of air trapped against my body. And then if I use one of those shiny foil space blankets to wrap around me that reflects the infrared light back to my body, keeping me warm, that's like having the low E coating. So if you had a single glazed windows, and we had some, it's like going outside in the winter in just a t-shirt. That would be crazy, and having single glazed windows is equally crazy. Low E triple glazed windows really are the unsung heroes of the zero carbon revolution. Now, I mentioned low cost, fit from the inside window inserts, and here they are. If your windows are in perfectly good shape, there's no point taking them out. But you might have, as we do, this is at our rental property, we've got these double hung sash windows, which are very common throughout New England, and they are notoriously drafty. It's very difficult to seal a double hung or even a single hung sash window. And yet by adding one of these panels of glass or acrylic or polycarbonate plastic from the inside, you just push fit it into the frame. You measure up the frame and send the measurements to the manufacturer, and they send you back the window. And you just, there's a rubber gasket or a strip of foam around the outside, and you just push fit it into the window frame. And now you've got a sealed window. This is a huge benefit for anyone with drafty sash windows. And sash windows are always drafted. I've never met one that fit well. And this will seal the window and seal the drafts. In addition, you've added a pane of glass, and you can get low E glass, which reflects the infrared and reflects the ultraviolet. And so you've got a lot of extra insulation in your window, and you've got a draft ceiling at the same time. So these are very good value for money. I measured 4 different, I bought windows from 4 different manufacturers and tried them out at my house. I had 6 of these dormer windows upstairs. I tried them out on, and you can see here what it looks like on the left. And the middle panel is using an infrared camera that measures heat. And the yellow is the warm and the purple is cold. And you can just about see there, the temperature in the middle of the window with the insert is about 63 degrees Fahrenheit. On the right-hand side, you can see the temperature without the window insert, and it's about 40 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a huge difference. The outdoor temperature on this day was about 30 degrees Fahrenheit. So you've got a big difference in the indoor temperature. Now, if you were sitting in front of these windows, if sitting in front of that 63-degree window, you'd feel fine. You wouldn't feel a cold draft across your feet, and you wouldn't feel cold because of that cold window next to your face. But if you're sitting next to that 40-degree one, there's going to be a cold draft across your feet, and there's going to be you're going to feel cold on your bare skin from that cold window pane. So these work very, very well. They virtually eliminate drafts, especially useful on those older sash windows, which tend to leak like a sieve. They're also very good at reducing noise. So if you live on a noisy street or you've got noisy neighbors, they reduce the noise by about 20 decibels, which means about a 4 times reduction in the perceived noise level. And they also work on historical properties. If you're in a historical commission district and you can't do anything to the outside of your windows, you can do something to the inside of your windows. The historical commission doesn't care what you do on the inside, so you can add these fit from the inside triple window inserts, which even on historical properties. These are also good for tenants because you can take these with you when you leave at the end of your lease. They're very good value for money, and these are all detailed in the book, and also in the the details are in the book. So just to summarize triple glazed windows. For details, this is all in the book. There are different types of low E glass. In fact, there are many different types of low E glass, and I have different recommendations for which works best for, say, a north-facing window or a south-facing window. You really want different types of low E coatings. There are zero interest loans available to purchase these if you live in Massachusetts, or you go to desireusa.org for the state-by-state incentives. I don't recommend those stretchy plastic film. It does work. I actually use this as an experiment to wrap around a wooden frame I made for some of the windows. It works very well, but if you stick it to the windows, what I found is when you try to pull it off, the paint comes off with the sticky tape, and I have nasty gluey stuff on my window frames from where I tried to take this off. All this is in chapter 4 in Zero Carbon Homes. Let's just pause here for a minute, Sam, and take a couple of questions on triple glazed windows.
Great. So someone asks, you mentioned insulating the ceiling of your basement. Did you also insulate the walls of the rooms in your basement? What type of insulation did you use in the basement? And lastly, did Mass Save cover insulating the basement?
Let me take that in reverse order. So Mass Save does cover basement insulation. I did not do mine through Mass Save. I just bought the insulation and did it myself. I didn't really know about Mass Save at the time. But if I were to do it again, I would do it exactly that way and get Mass Save to come, and they would pay for most of that work on the installation of the ceiling of the basement. The type of insulation I use is that brown fiberglass. It's not the pink Owens Corning, which is sort of standard issue fiberglass. Mine was made by I'm blanking on the name of the company now. But the reason it's brown is because it uses recycled glass. And so I bought that because it's slightly more eco-friendly than that pink Owens Corning brand fiberglass. But it doesn't matter what type of fiberglass it is. It's all very effective and very cheap. And you can do it yourself. If you can do it yourself, wear a face mask, like your COVID kind of face mask, and eye protection and gloves, because the fibers can irritate while you're handling it. Once you've got it up there, it's completely safe. But it can cause irritation on the skin and in the eyes if you're doing it yourself. But Mass Save will pay for basement insulation. And there's the first part of your question I've forgotten. Can you just remind me, Sam, what the first part of the question was?
Let's see. Did you also insulate the walls of the rooms
Thank
in
you.
the basement?
Thank you. All right, so we did not. Our basement is used solely for storage. Okay, none of it is used as living space. If you are using part of your basement as living space, do not insulate the ceiling. That's when you need to insulate the walls or the floor. Now, insulating the floor is tough unless you actually are building the house from scratch, when it's easy to put it in underneath the concrete slab. But if you've got a concrete slab today and you can't really insulate it, but what I'd recommend is if you put a carpet in, put in a thick pad underneath the carpet. That thick pad will probably add R1 to R2 to the insulation of value of the floor, and the insulation of value of the floor is close to 0 unless there's concrete is a very poor insulator. But even putting a pad and then like a thick carpet on top will greatly improve the insulation from the bottom, and it's much cheaper, much more practical than trying to add insulation to the floor. So if you're using your basement as living space, don't insulate the ceiling, insulate the walls and the floor with a carpet and a pad. If you are not using it as living space, if you're using it as storage space like we do, then you do want to insulate the ceiling of the basement so you keep the warmth in the house and not in the basement. Now, when we did this, the temperature of our basement cooled by about 7 or 8 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's a good thing because all that heat is now up in the living room and the dining room and the kitchen and not down in the basement where it wasn't doing anyone any good except the worms, who were very happy in the wintertime that our heat was keeping the soil nice and warm outside the house. Does that answer the question?
I think so. We'll do one more question here. Is there any concern that you can make your home too tight? We have vapor barriers in our construction and have had to add additional roof vents to create more airflow and avoid mold and mildew problems.
Yes, well, I think you answered the question yourself there. The answer is yes, you can make a building too tight. And that was partly the criticism I was mentioning earlier about passive house standards and the ultra tight building envelope they require to get the passive house certification. You can make it too tight. And if you make it too tight, then there's no air circulating inside your house. You are effectively living inside a Ziploc bag. And so what passive house requires is that you add a ventilator. So you add an energy recovery ventilator. That's a pipe, a hole through the wall of your basement that sucks in fresh air, and it actually passes it over the warm air going out. So the air is warmed up by the air leaving. So it's a heat recovery ventilator or energy recovery ventilator. And that is the source of your fresh air. If you don't do that, you will get mold, and then the family will get asthma. This is a serious problem in some houses. There was a house in our town in Dover that was condemned. It was literally demolished by the Board of Health because the occupant kept having to go to the emergency room with asthma. So this is not a trivial problem. In fact, I think mold is actually the most insidious problem in housing today, and is often caused by having too tight of a building envelope. So you can convince yourself not to have too tight of a building envelope for health reasons, because it might lead to mold and asthma, or for cost reasons, because getting to that super tight building envelope is actually very expensive and requires that energy recovery ventilator, which costs about $5,000 each, plus you've got to get it fitted. So I just don't see the point that there is some air infiltration through your walls, which is a good thing. It's evaporating the moisture in your walls. It's taking that condensation out of the walls. And if you block that completely, you will have to replace that by having a pipe that brings air into the house. And that air, of course, is not going through the walls. So it will eventually evaporate the moisture in the walls, but it's much more efficient just to let some air naturally bleed in through your walls. So I don't recommend going for a super tight building envelope. I'm not saying have a drafty house. You need to get it down to probably below about 5 ACH 50, which is measured by doing a blower door test on your house. Something below 5 ACH 50 is probably good, but getting below 1 is very expensive, very difficult to do, and in my opinion, not worth it, either for cost reasons, and because you may get to the point where you get mold in your house, which leads to asthma, and even if it doesn't lead to asthma, it will lead to rot. And so things like cathedral ceilings, this is the biggest single problem that cathedral ceilings cause in houses, is rotting of the timbers, because moisture rises in the house and it goes through the can light fixtures and skylights in the cathedral ceiling and hits the cold roof surface, condenses, forms moisture, and now you've got a wetness problem that's going to lead to mold and eventually rotting of those timbers. So I think humidity is the biggest single problem, I think, in houses these days. And if you go with a very tight building envelope, you are running the risk of getting mold and asthma.
It looks like great. I think I see Scott was raising his hand. I don't know, Scott, if you wanted to do a quick follow-up question.
Thanks, Sam. Quick question about the basement ceiling insulation. Is there a vapor barrier on that on the upside, or is it just batting?
So on my basement, there is no vapor barrier at all. It is just the wooden joists, which go up to support the plywood base of the floor, and there's no vapor barrier at all. In fact, the fiberglass I put in does not even have a vapor barrier on it. You can certainly use vapor barriers, and people do it all the time. I chose not to, only because I think a little bit of air circulation is a good thing. There's always something leaking in a basement. There's always a dripping pipe or some water coming up from the ground below, or maybe you get a bathtub overflows or something. There's always some water in the basement. And so a little bit of air circulation, and loose fiberglass does have a small amount of air circulation, not very much, but just enough to evaporate some condensation, whereas you put that vapor barrier in and you're blocking that condensation. I know people use it all the time. I don't think you'll go wrong with having a vapor barrier on insulation on the ceiling of the basement, but I did not do it.
And how do you hold the batting between the floor joists?
So I bought 12-inch deep bats going into a 10-inch deep floor joist, and they come sized, I think it's about 15 inches is the width of the bat, and floor joists are almost universally on 16-inch centers, and each floor joist is 2 inches wide. So there's actually about a 14-inch gap between the two floor joists. So pushing a 15-inch bat between a 14-inch gap makes it squeeze a little bit and keeps it in place. And then in addition, you can just buy lengths of wire, like stiff wire, like coat hanger type wire, that you just push up between the wooden rafters, just to give you a little bow to keep the fiberglass up there. I found it works very well. Haven't had any problems with fiberglass collapsing or falling down.
Thank you, sir.
By the way, Scott is moonlighting here tonight. Scott is actually trained and certified as a zero carbon coach. One of the things I've done, which I can't do anymore because I'm just too busy, is I've trained some people in my methodology so they can go out and help more people than I could possibly help on my own. And Scott is one of those. Scott is one of those people. So thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Green.
All right. So should we keep going then, Sam?
Yeah, any questions? There are a few other questions in the chat, but we can definitely address them at the end.
Okay, great. Let's keep going then. So the fourth part of HITS is the solar panels. So the solar panels were the second biggest source of cutting our carbon footprint, about a third, about 14 tons per year, but they were the biggest source of money saving. They're also the most expensive thing we did. $42,000, that's for both arrays, the one over my house and the one over my garage, saving us over $5,500 a year, paying for itself in about 7 years. Now remember, this is all on the old prices. I did all of this when Eversource was charging 21 cents per kilowatt hour of electricity. Eversource is now charging 29 cents. That's because of the increase in the cost of natural gas over the last year. So these payback calculations are all much better today. And in addition to all of that, solar panels are cheaper now than they were 5 years ago. So the economics here have improved markedly. My cost of electricity is still between 5 and 8 cents per kilowatt hour. Eversource was 23 cents a couple of years ago. It's now 28 or 29 cents per kilowatt hour. My cost is the same. My cost has not changed. And so this is an even better value for money today than it was 4 or 5 years ago. Now, in addition to all of that, if that weren't good enough for you, based on a large body of academic research published in journals, the house price will increase by between about 4 and 7% by having solar panels on the roof. For our house, that was about $111,000 from installing the solar panels. That is more than double our investment in solar panels and more than our net investment in the entire Fab Four. So you no longer have to wait in that payback period to get your money back. You can now get your money back by selling your house and make your return that way. So this really is a breakthrough. You can now not only get paid to cut your carbon footprint, but increase your house price too. And the increase in house price for adding solar panels, between 4 and 7%, is actually almost exactly the same, again, found by academic researchers, for adding heat pumps. Adding heat pumps also adds about 4 to 7% to the price of your house. So if you're actually thinking about selling your house, dressing it up for sale by adding solar panels and heat pumps is a very good way to do it, because they will more than pay for themselves on the increased house price. So let me just briefly explain how solar panels work. There's a solar panel right there on the left. Light comes from the sun in different wavelengths, hits the solar panels, and then some very fancy quantum mechanics happens, but you really don't care because electricity pours out the other side. There's no moving parts in a solar panel. It's terrific. They last forever. The electricity that comes out is what's called DC, or direct current electricity. That's the same type of electricity you see in a battery, the same type you see in a car. That's why you have red and black leads on your battery in your car. That's the DC, the positive and the negative. But your house uses a different kind of electricity called AC, or alternating current. And so a box called an inverter mounted on the side of your house converts the electricity from DC to AC and feeds it to your meter. And when you do add solar panels, your electricity company will replace your current meter, which is a one-way meter measuring electricity coming from the street to your house, with a two-way meter called a net meter, and that measures the electricity you're using from the street net of, or after subtracting, the electricity you have put out to the street from your solar panels. And then the net, those two, is fed to your house, and so you have your connection to the grid all day and all night. So sometimes people say, well, what happens if you've got solar panels at night? Do I need a battery? The answer is no, you don't, because you always maintain that connection to the grid. So on overcast days in the winter, when you're not making enough solar electricity to run your house, you'll be drawing power from the grid. During the summertime, you'll be making far more electricity than you're using, and then you're pushing that electricity out to the grid, so you're powering other people's houses at that point. And your electricity company gives you a credit on your bill for every kilowatt hour that you put out. And net metering, as this is called, is very generous in Massachusetts. You get a credit on your bill for almost the full cost of that kilowatt hour of electricity that you put out to the grid. Many other states have less generous policies. And if you look at the federal incentives for solar panels, the state incentives for solar panels, and the net metering incentive for solar panels, net metering is actually the biggest subsidy of all three in terms of how much money it saves you. So these are the financials for our second array. The gross cost was $56,000. The federal tax credit was then 30%. It's now 26%. There's a mass tax credit. There is still a mass tax credit of $1,000. The present value of the mass SREC income, which has now been done away with and replaced by something called SMART, which I'll talk about in just a minute, was about $23,000. The net cost was only about a third of what the headline cost was, and that produces electricity at about 5 cents per kilowatt hour compared to today's Eversource at about 29 cents. The net present value is about $30,000, 14% IRR, breaks even in 7 years. Now, I've recently done bidding on clients for under the SMART program, not the old SREC program, and that came in with a levelized cost of electricity of about 4 to 6 cents per kilowatt hour, which is even cheaper than my array from 2017. So, and that's the price. That's your cost of electricity. The price you're paying to Eversource and National Grid today is even higher. So there's even better value for money, more savings than what I've got. Now, you don't need to do these calculations yourself, although if you're an accountant or an economist, or you've got some financial training, of course you can do these yourselves. But if you use the Energy Sage website, they will do all the calculations for you, so you don't need to do them at all. And they will compare bids for you from different contractors, all using the same metrics, including this levelized cost of electricity and the net present value and the IRR. So now this is for questions. Oh, I'm sorry. So for details on how to perform these calculations, it's all in the book. Lease, loan, and cash purchase options are available for solar panels. UMass 5 Bank is offering 4.5% interest. Sunlight Financial claims 1 to 2% interest, which is going to be great. If you borrow the money to buy the solar panels. If you lease them, so there's no cash out at all, the rate per kilowatt hour works out about 13 cents, which is still less than half the 29 cents that Eversource is currently charging. So with no cash down, you can get a very big reduction in your electric bill. It just won't be as much of a reduction as if you pay cash or take out a loan to buy the solar panels. I don't recommend solar hot water panels. There's too many moving parts, and they don't give you any heat in the wintertime, which is when you need it. Get multiple quotes and use the Energy Sage website, and please see chapter 4 in the book. And also, if you are interested in a battery, These can work very well, but you've got to ask a lot of questions. And there's a lot of questions and answers on my website about that. So let's just pause here, Sam, and just see if there's a couple of questions on solar panels, then we'll go on to summarize everything.
Great. Someone asks, are there restrictions for how much solar you can have?
There are. It's not so much that you can or can't have it, but the subsidies go down the bigger the array you've got. So up to 10 kilowatt hours, you get 100% net metering, for instance, which is the biggest subsidy of all of them. Above 10 kilowatts, the subsidy drops to 60% of the retail price of electricity. Now, it's still very good value for money. I have one 15 kilowatt array and one 17 kilowatt array. So both of them are over that 10 kilowatt limit, but you still get very, very generous net metering on the subsidies on those panels. So I wouldn't not install solar panels because you're going over 10 kilowatts. It's still very good value for money, and most people will need more than 10 kilowatts if they're going to add heat pumps as well. Because remember, when you add heat pumps, your electricity bill is going to go up, and your heating oil or propane or natural gas bill is going to go down. So you need to have a bigger solar panel array to offset all of that electricity you're using after you've added the heat pumps. This is why you need to do all four of the heat pumps, the insulation, the triple glazed windows, and the solar panels, because by adding the insulation, you cut the amount of energy your house uses. By using the heat pumps, you heat as efficiently as you can, and then you need enough solar panels to make all of that electricity now for your very energy efficient house heated by heat pumps. That's how you get to zero. Any more questions, Sam?
This person asks, I had a company come to my house to give me a quote for solar panels. It would reduce my electricity bill, but they would own the panels. Do you recommend buying the panels outright? The company was Sunburn.
So I've never heard of that company in particular, but generally there are three ways you can pay for solar panels. You can buy them for cash, you can take out a loan specifically for the solar panels, usually from a local bank, or you can do a lease, which means no cash down and no loan either. So essentially you've bundled the financing into the monthly payment on the lease. This is very much the same thing as buying a car. You can buy a car and pay cash. You can buy a car and get a loan from a bank and use that cash to buy the car, or you can lease the car and pay monthly, and then you're combining your lease payments are partly paying off the car and partly paying off the loan, paying the interest on the loan and paying back the principal on the loan. Same thing with solar panels. Now, if you buy the car for cash, that's the cheapest way to buy the car, but not everyone has the cash. So some people take out loans. That's the second cheapest way to buy the car. The third cheapest way to buy the car is to lease it and pay monthly and essentially pay the financing cost at the same time as the cost of buying the car. Same thing for solar panels. The cheapest way to buy solar panels is to pay cash, but not everyone has the cash. Then you can go to a bank or like Sunlight Financial, which is a specialist supplier of loans for solar panels. And that's more expensive than paying cash, but if you don't have the cash spare to do it, it's a very good way to do it. And the most expensive way to buy solar panels is to lease them from the installer, and now you're paying more per kilowatt hour for the electricity, but it's still cheap. Like I said, the lease or power purchase agreement rate today is around 13 cents per kilowatt hour. So if you're paying 28, 29 cents for Eversource on National Grid electricity today, that's a huge cut in your electricity bills, and there's no cash down. So it's a very easy way to get into solar power without having to have that upfront cost. That we were able to front that upfront cost ourselves, but not everyone can. So leases are very good value for money. If you can't borrow the money, perhaps your credit rating is not as good as you'd like it to be, or you don't have the cash in the bank to pay for solar panels, leasing is a very good option, particularly with electricity prices as high as they are today.
Great, thank you. There are more questions, but I think we can get to them later.
Okay, so let me try to wrap this all up then. First, here are the questions to ask a solar panel installer. I'm not going to go through these, but these are on my website. You can download the slides at the end. So the trick, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, is putting this all together. And on the album Yellow Submarine by the real Fab Four, the Beatles, they sang the song All Together Now, which I will not sing for you. The singing gene skipped generation in my family. All my kids have it, but I don't. So here's the cost of heating your house for the same amount of energy from different types of heating fuels. Natural gas is the cheapest. Now this is used to be, this is cost of natural gas from about 2 years ago, about 5 cents per kilowatt hour. Now it's almost double. That's 8 or 9 cents per kilowatt hour of heat in the house. Heating oil, more expensive than natural gas. It's still more expensive than natural gas, but about 8 cents per kilowatt hour a couple of years back. Propane, very expensive. All these costs have moved up together. So the differential is the same, even if the absolute number is different now. Propane is probably more like 15 to 20 cents per kilowatt hour of heat in the house now. And electric utility electricity, this is done at 21 cents per kilowatt hour. It's now 28, 29 cents per kilowatt hour. Everyone knows that using electricity to heat a house is ridiculously expensive. It's much cheaper to burn a fossil fuel to do so. And even if you were to use rooftop electricity from solar panels at say around 7 or 8 cents per kilowatt hour, even if you're using that in just a direct resistance heating element to heat your house, or a fan heater, it would cost about the same as heating oil. But if you use that electricity from your rooftop solar panels, let's say 8 cents per kilowatt hour, and you run a heat pump with its 2.5 times heating efficiency, you're heating the house at less than 2 cents per kilowatt hour of heat in the house. Now, this is done from numbers from a few years ago. Heat pumps have got cheaper and they've got more efficient in the meantime. So you could probably do this at close to 1 cent per kilowatt hour of heat in the house using solar electricity running a heat pump today, compared to natural gas, which used to be 5 cents, is now more like 8 or 9 cents per kilowatt hour at the current cost of natural gas. So solar running a heat pump is now by far the cheapest way to heat your house. It was the cheapest way even a few years ago, and it's got much cheaper since, because the efficiency of heat pump has gone up, the cost has gone down, and the cost of natural gas has gone through the roof. So this is by far the cheapest way to heat your house today, and you will never be subject to the vagaries of Vladimir Putin's invasions in places like Ukraine, which have pushed the cost of natural gas up. So the key to going zero on your house is to cut your house's energy use so much you can generate it all from solar panels on your roof. You cut it with insulation and draft ceiling, you cut it with triple glazed windows, you cut it with very efficient heat pumps, and you generate it with solar panels. Now, this is what we did, but that is not the order in which we did it. You may remember we did heat pumps and solar panels first, and then triple glazed windows and air sealing and insulation last. This is the optimal order, right? If maybe you don't have the budget, either financially or just the bandwidth, you don't have the headspace to do all of this year, do it in this order, and this will save you the most money over time. For tenants, there are options you can do here. I won't go into all of this. If people have questions, if there are tenants on the call, we can go into this in the Q&A. And my philosophy here is cut what you can and offset what you can't. There is nothing that requires you to get to zero. For many people, that's going to be out of reach or just too expensive for them or not affordable in their budget today. My suggestion is cut what you can, do as much as you can with your bandwidth and your budget, and then offset what you can't. Offsets are pretty cheap. I do this for things like air travel, and offset my air travel so that my entire family's carbon footprint is zero, not just that from heating and electricity. Now, everything I said this evening has been about money, and it's been about carbon emissions. But there's another thing we should be talking about, which is the health impact of burning fossil fuels. And just here you can see on the left-hand side is the death rate from accidents and air pollution from burning different types of fuel. And on the right-hand side is the greenhouse gas emissions. And you can see coal, oil, natural gas, and biomass have both very high death rates from asthma and just mining accidents and things like that. Also very high greenhouse gas emissions. Look at the bottom four: hydropower, nuclear, wind and solar. Almost nothing in terms of death rates from accidents and air pollution, and almost nothing in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So health is a big factor here. And I think health is a very immediate problem. If you have someone in the house with asthma, for instance, I highly recommend you do everything I said, regardless of the financial consequences, because this will just clean up the air in your house and probably lead to less asthma attacks for your kids or your parents if they're the ones who are suffering from this. So the health benefits are very significant, even though most of what I've talked about tonight is money saving and carbon emissions reductions. So just to summarize everything we said tonight, you can cut pollution, the health benefits I talked about. You can reduce the impact of global warming, and you can save money and even make a good return on investment. This is the summary. All these tables are in the book. All these tables are available in my slides, which you can download for free from my website. But overall, we've saved an awful lot of money and cut an awful lot of carbon emissions out of the atmosphere. Now, this is where you can go for further information. There's a PDF file of the slides I used tonight. You can just download that from my website. There's a YouTube recording of a previous webinar, and Sam was recording this tonight, so I'm sure that'll be posted on the Duxbury Library website within a day or two. There's also written up questions and answers from previous webinars. There are over 300 questions that people have answered. So if you've got a question, somebody else has probably got it too. And there are answers written up there if you want to go back and look through that on my website. The free book is available from my website. I just type in iPad or Kindle. There's actually 2 versions. You have to download the book from there and use the code DUX. That will make it free. Occasionally this doesn't work. There's some problem with browser incompatibility. And if it doesn't work, email me. My email address is at the bottom there, dgreen@greenZeroCarbon.com. The paperback version, if you want the old-fashioned paperback version, is not free. This is the electronic version you can get for free. You can also get this special stuck-at-home COVID-19 edition using the code COVID-19 from our website. This is a smaller book that just covers simple things you could do that were quick, easy, and cut your carbon emissions while you were stuck at home with COVID. So that's all the information I want to talk about this evening. So let's just take questions from the chat, Sam. And if you can figure out how to take people off mute, then we can actually take questions live if you want to do that. I will stop sharing my screen now.
Okay, great. So I have some questions here that I've been trying to like keep track of that I didn't get to before.
Okay.
So sorry if the questions are a little all over the place. Okay, so do you have any thoughts / recommendations about using solar shingles rather than solar panels?
Yes, so solar shingles are intended to be like roof tiles that cover your entire roof, and so don't look like solar panels, but still generate solar electricity. The most common brand of these is Tesla. Tesla makes these solar shingles. I do not recommend them only because I've never used them myself. I don't know anyone who's used them either. The anecdotal evidence I've heard from people like Tesla engineers who've installed them on their roofs is they're really expensive. The only way Tesla advertises these is as though the cost makes sense when you replace the roof for other reasons. Well, that's fine if you need to replace your roof, but most people don't need to replace their roofs. So adding solar shingles can be very expensive compared to solar panels. I also feel that it's rather an unproven technology, whereas solar panels have been around for 20, 30 years. They're very robust, they're very reliable, there's no moving parts, they're very easy to be installed by local installers who've been around for a long time. Whereas solar shingles is a new technology. They haven't got a long in-life period, so don't really know what happens after 10 years, 15 years, 30 years, etc. So I just feel like it's unproven at this point. And I've not used them. I haven't even got quotes for them because I feel I'm better off just going with tried and tested, true solar panels from local installers who've got a reputation for doing this kind of stuff. That's my perspective on it.
Speaking of that, since there are so many companies trying to install solar panels, how can we find a good, reputable company, whether that's local or whatever?
So if you live in the Dover area, so the west suburban Boston area, there are 2 companies I've used that I would recommend. One is New England Clean Energy. They did my first array. I thought they were very good, very technical, very competent. I do think they're a bit on the expensive side. And I've also used Great Sky Solar. I think they're a bit cheaper, but still very technically good at what they do. Those are the only 2 companies I've used, so the only ones I have actual experience of. There are a couple of companies I didn't use. One was Solar Flare, and there was a 4th one, I forget now. But what I actually suggest is download my slides that I presented tonight, and look for the slide on questions to ask a solar installer. And I recommend you ask those questions first. If they can't answer those questions, I'd find another installer, because those are the questions you really need to know the answers to in order to install a solar panel array properly, in order to purchase an array properly, in my opinion. So that's my suggestion. And then use the Energy Sage website. When you do this, you put in your electric bill, and they calculate how many panels you need, and they bid it out to multiple contractors. And when the contractors reply, they reply in the same format. So you can compare side by side, apples to apples, how this contractor compares to this contractor. That is a very good way to compare things. Otherwise, you find, I've found, that solar panel contractors use different methodologies for calculating things like the net present value and the IRR, and then you're comparing apples to oranges. It's very difficult to compare one company's bid to another, but if you use the Energy Sage website, you can do that. The other thing that gives you a bit more quality control is to go through a town program. Quite a few towns have now had solarized campaigns. My town, Dover, has not, but the town next door, Sherburne, has. And the town itself selects a contractor for you, and then everyone in the town uses that contractor. So you get some bulk buying discounts, as well as a level of quality control provided by the town. Now, no town I've ever experienced provides any kind of warranty in addition to what the manufacturer does, but at least they've vetted the contractors first. So I think you can be, have some assurance that you've got the better quality contractors rather than just anyone doing this stuff. And I do recommend you go with probably one of the bigger companies, and now they can be a local company, but not sort of a two-man and a dog kind of installer, because you need them to have a staff. And the reason you need a staff is because there's a lot of paperwork with the utility company, paperwork with the state subsidy program. So you need someone who knows the way around all the paperwork. And that's very hard for the very smallest of installers to do. So I would go with one of the larger installers. They don't have to be a national company. I've found the bigger of the smaller local companies are very good at this. But I wouldn't go with maybe your regular electrician for installing the solar panels. I think you probably need someone who's got a bit more experience doing it, and particularly has experience with all the administrative back office stuff that can be very time consuming if you don't know what you're doing.
Great. How does one calculate a home carbon footprint?
So it's very easy to do, and it's all written out on my website. So if you go to my website and just there's a search box there and type in I don't know, how to measure the carbon footprint of my home. Actually, if you go to the questions, there's a tab that says questions and answers from the webinars. I think it's one of the very first questions that I answer on that page, the Q&A page, is how do I calculate the carbon footprint? It's a post on my website, and it's pretty easy to do. You just measure how much, let's say you're on heating oil, you measure how much heating oil you used for a year. Just take the deliveries for a year is fine, or average it over 3 years. Take the kilowatt hours of electricity, which you can get directly from your bill. Then there are conversion factors, which are all on the website. You just multiply them out, add them up, and that's how you get to the carbon footprint of your home. It's really pretty easy to do.
Okay, great. Continuing with solar panels, is it possible for neighbors to share solar power? For example, one person's home may not be suitable, but the others might be perfect for that scenario.
Yes, it is. You're exactly right. Obviously, physically, you can't share them. You can't sort of bridge the house between one and your neighbor. But there is a provision of the net metering law called Z metering, just the letter Z hyphen metering. This allows you to build up credits on one person's bill. So suppose I have a very sunny location at my house. I put solar panels everywhere. I generate far more credits on my bill than I can ever use. I can give those credits to somebody else. Now, the only constraint is that person has to be in the same utility load zone, which is the Eversource load zone in Eastern Massachusetts goes from roughly the water line in Boston to roughly 495. So it's a pretty big area, but you can't have your house on the Cape give your electricity credits to someone who lives in Boston. So you have to be in the same utility load zone. But as long as you are, then you can just transfer those credits. And I do this, for instance, and several of my clients have done this. One guy actually did have a house on the Cape, and his I think it was his mother-in-law lived next door. And his house was very sunny, and so he was able to generate more credits than needed, and he gave those credits away to his mother-in-law's house. Another colleague of mine did it, I think, for his sister's house, and he actually charged her. He charged her for the kilowatt hours that he gave to her. I don't know if he gave her a discount, but yeah, you can do this. You can become your own power station essentially, and spread out your zero carbon power to all your friends and neighbors.
Great.
So that's called Z metering, by the way. So if you want to do this and you think your house is very sunny and you want to split it with a neighbor, ask your installer and just make sure you ask, what about Z metering? And then this is one of the bits of admin. They'll apply the paperwork so you can actually just assign over your credits. You can assign 20%, 30%, 50%, whatever you want, to a particular meter number, so somebody else's house. But it's just more paperwork. But I did it on mine and it worked pretty well.
Great, thank you. Can you just reiterate what renters can do to kind of implement some of these tips that you've shared?
Yeah, so there are several things renters can do. The things that will pay back the fastest, like insulation, are something that's actually worth your while doing even on a 12-month lease. If you've got drafty windows, it's worth plugging up the holes yourself, rather than suffering the bills from those drafty windows. And you can do that by going to Home Depot or Lowe's and either buying spray foam and just spraying it into the cracks, or you can just buy tubes of expanded foam and you just squeeze it into the gaps around the windows. You can also squeeze it into the panes between sash windows, which are notoriously drafty. It's not easy to do this, but you can do it, and it's worth doing it because those foam strips that cost next to nothing. And for pennies, you can cut down drafts from your windows. If the windows in your rental property are a standard size, then it's probably worthwhile buying the window inserts, because you can take them with you and go to your next apartment. Now, if the next apartment is a different size window, you're going to be out of luck with that. In which case, you may want to consider doing what I call poor man's triple glazed windows. This is where this is in the book. It's in the book you can download for free. It's also in the COVID-19 edition of the book, where you make yourself a wooden frame in the shape of the window, put some foam strip around the outside so it just seals in by itself, and then buy that shrink wrap plastic film from a hardware store, wrap it around that frame. You use a hairdryer to stretch it out and make it all nice and tight and shiny, and then you just push it into the window frame. I made these myself. The wood and the screws and the tape and everything cost about $30 for a window, and it will more than pay for itself. I have 3 of these in my house. They don't even look that bad. They don't look great, and this is what led me into exploring the fit from the inside triple glazed windows. Fit from the inside window inserts, which are pretty cheap, but they're about $200 a window, and that starts to get expensive if you might not use it the next time. But for $30 a window, you can make these wooden framed, double-sided window inserts, which I call poor man's triple glazed windows, that you can make yourself, and they are so cheap and they're so effective. They will pay for themselves easily within a 12-month lease. Beyond that, I actually recommend you sit down and talk with the landlord. The problem with things like heat pumps and solar panels is it's a capital investment by the landlord, and it saves you, the tenant, money on your electricity and your heating bills, which is not really a fair trade. But if you sit down with the landlord and say, look, I would be willing to pay, let's say, $100 extra a month in rent if I can get $200 a month in rent in off my utility bills. Well, that's something the landlord might be interested in. And then you're sort of on the same page together, working to cut your building's carbon footprint and your utility bills. But you've got to cut the landlord in somewhat in the savings. Otherwise, they have no incentive to make that investment in the property. So that's the way I suggest doing it for the bigger things like heat pumps and solar panels. It can be quite difficult to do this for heat pumps, but I think it'd be quite worthwhile doing this for solar panels. And finally, on heat pumps, you can get portable heat pumps that you can take with you when you move from one house to another. They're a bit like floor-mounted air conditioning units, but instead of having the old window-mounted air conditioning unit that goes into a sash window in an apartment, you pull the sash window down almost closed, and there's a board that fits into the window and two pipes, and those two pipes go to the heat pump sitting on the floor. Those heat pumps will now heat and cool your house. So it's like a window air conditioner that cools your house in the summertime, but it sits on the floor with just the pipes going through the window. And the circuit is reversed in wintertime, and it will heat your house in the wintertime. And that you can take with you when you go to your next apartment. So those are good options for renters.
Great. Pamela, it looks like Pamela has her hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Do you have a battery? Have you looked into the distributed grid benefits of battery backup, where you can sell your power back to the grid on high usage times, time of use usage, and make money that way?
Yes, I have, Pamela. And I'm very close to actually buying a battery for my house. Now, if you do this right, and I'm only talking about Massachusetts because the subsidies make a huge difference here. If you do this right in Massachusetts, you can actually make money on your battery. But the way the battery subsidy works under the SMART program in Massachusetts is it is based off the amount of kilowatt hours that your array produces. So putting in a battery on its own makes no sense. You're paying the full price, but you will get it subsidized if you put in the battery with solar panels. So if you put in a fairly large solar panel array, like maybe 15 kilowatts or higher, and you pair it with a battery, you get an extra subsidy. So the going rate subsidy for SMART today is about 7 or 8 cents per kilowatt hour subsidy. The additional subsidy of having a battery is about 4 cents on top of that. So that's quite a lot. And if you're pairing that with a large solar panel array, so you're producing a lot of kilowatt hours of electricity, you get a big dollar subsidy, which helps to pay off the cost of the battery. Now, in addition to that, Pamela, you mentioned that there's sort of grid-connected batteries. Eversource, our utility company, offers this. It's called Connected Solutions. And Connected Solutions allows the utility company to use your battery to power the grid usually on hot days in summer when everyone's got the air conditioning on. Hot sunny days, you charge up your battery with solar panels, and now you give permission to Eversource, to Connected Solutions, to discharge your battery to the grid during those hot sunny days when the air conditioning's on. Eversource will not do this when there's a storm coming, so you will never lose your battery when you need it, usually in the wintertime. And they will pay you to do this. They pay about $1,250 a year to have the access to your battery when Eversource needs it. This is quite good value for money for you. It's quite a significant subsidy. That's over about 10 years. And that would be, let's say, $12,000 over 10 years. And a battery might cost you $25,000, something like that these days. So that's a very big subsidy. And then in addition, you've got the additional 4 cents per kilowatt hour adder in the SMART program, which will add up as well. So yes, you can do all of that. You also mentioned time of day. We do not have a time of day tariff in Massachusetts. Any time of the day when you buy electricity, it's the same price. But in other states, they do have a time of day tariff where it's more expensive in the daytime and less expensive at night. And then you can arbitrage
municipal Concord Municipal Light Plant, and they're planning to do time of use rates.
Okay, I think it's a very good idea. I wish Eversource would do it. That's something that the Attorney General would have to negotiate with the utility companies. But I think it's great to have a time of day metering because if you do have a battery, you can then charge it up during the cheap times and discharge it during the expensive times. So you can make money on that on that arbitrage. But also you can just think about doing things like running your air conditioners first thing in the morning when it's on cheap electricity, cool the house down, and then don't use the air conditioning again until much later in the day. So you can sort of shift some of the heating and cooling mode in your house, just because of that time of day tariff. So I wish Eversource and National Grid would move to that. It'd be great. But right now we don't have it for Eversource and National Grid.
One little quick, could you stop sharing so we can see you bigger and everybody else too?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. All right. Sorry about that. I thought I was back on stage. I'm not. Okay, I'm back now.
All right, great. I think, let's see. Those were most of the questions that were in the chat. So if I missed your question, feel free to resend it. Someone did ask, can you put the screen up, or can you send the link for your website in case it was missed here in the chat?
Yeah, so can I just suggest, Sam, that you just type into the chat and send it to everyone. And the website address is www.greenzerocarbon, greenzerocarbonhome.com.
Sure.
Yes, that is the website, greenzerocarbonhome.com. GRENZEROCARBONHOME.com. There you go. Sam just put it in the chat box there. Sam, if it's possible to take everyone off mute, we can actually do live Q&A if people want to do that.
Sure.
Or we can just do it through the chat box too.
Yeah, great. You can take yourself off mute if you, or use the raise hand feature if you have a question.
I don't want to hog it, but I want to ask about your designs for new construction.
So I have done this too. I've done designs for new construction. In fact, the first one I did was a client in Wellesley, next door to me, who had a house on the Cape, and the house was new, being built new, and he'd actually used a very good like low carbon footprint design build architect called Geologic, based in Maine, and he just wanted a second opinion on the plans. And he sent me the plans, and I did the energy modeling on it, and what I found was it was a really good design. I was very impressed with Geologic's design. They do this by building all the walls basically in a factory in Maine, and then ship all the walls with the panel, with the windows, the doors, the framing, everything already in place. You pour a concrete pad, and they just come and erect the four sides and put the roof on. It's a fabulous thing. But that worked very well. And despite the fact that Geologic, I think, did a terrific job, I was still able to optimize that house and cut the carbon footprint still further, and give him a lot of reassurance that this really was a good investment for him, and not just a sort of a, I don't know, he wasn't just wasting a lot of money on buying this new design of house. So I have done work on new houses, and it's been very, very effective.
We have some problems with affordable housing, building affordable housing. It's too expensive to exist. Is there ways that we could use that sort of thing, like here in Concord, for affordable houses?
Yeah, so I think affordable housing is often only talking about half of the problem. And the problem is buying the house and how much you spend for that house. But if you buy a cheap house that has no insulation and dreadful windows and tons of drafts, and you're stuck with massive utility bills the rest of your life, I don't think that's really affordable housing. I think that's very
Well, I'm talking about, we've got land, we don't have the buildings. Build from scratch.
Well, I think if you're building from scratch, it's actually very easy to build a house. It's not much more expensive to build a house with a zero carbon footprint, or at least a very low carbon footprint, compared to building one with a very high carbon footprint. Insulation is very cheap. It costs almost nothing to add extra insulation during the building phase of a house. It's very expensive to add it later on. It's very easy to put in better air sealing, not perfect air sealing, but better than average. And it's easy to put solar panels on a roof as well. So if you design a house from the start, you can make it both low cost to purchase and low cost to own and operate as well. I see very few architects and very few towns really considering this whole package. They tend to focus much more on just the initial cost of the house, really without any regard to the operating costs of the house. And I think affordable really means both, not just the upfront cost.
Okay, it looks like we have a question in the chat here. Do you know if the film that can be applied to windows professionally to existing windows, does that help with insulation of windows?
When you say the film, I think you're probably referring to the stretchy plastic stuff. It looks a bit like saran wrap that you stick to the inside of the window frame with double-sided tape, and then you take a hairdryer and you go over it and you heat it up, and it stretches out and goes sort of taut.
No, that is not what I was thinking of. It's
okay.
the stuff that they apply to it because it then causes the sun to bounce off so that you don't get as much heating in the house.
Okay, yes, that's like the reflective material. Yeah, I have some of that on my windows here too. I was experimenting with it to see how it works. It does work pretty well. The biggest problem with it is it's just shiny, and a lot of people don't like that shininess. It's like a semi mirror, like a semi reflective mirror. A lot of people don't like that, but it does work. I can tell you, it absolutely works to keep the heat out of the house in the summertime. And if you have large south-facing windows with no shade, either shade from trees or shade from an overhang over that window, they're going to get baking hot in the summertime. And the solar gain from the sun through those windows in the summertime is going to be an enormous amount of heat inside your house. And so your air conditioning bill is going to be huge to get that heat out and keep it at a reasonable temperature. So so it's very good if that's your circumstances. I have personally tried it. I've also tried other things as well. I'm lucky enough to have some trees not too far from my house, and I didn't cut them down when we cut down other trees around them to open up the back garden. And so I kept that with a very nice maple tree about 40 feet away from the window of this room I'm sitting in right now, which has no shade over, no like a built-in shade over the window. And so the shade from that tree is naturally very effective because the leaves are on the tree. In the summertime, it's a maple tree, it's deciduous, but the leaves are off the tree in the wintertime. So when the sun is low in the sky, in the wintertime, we get nice sun into the room, heating it up. When the sun is high in the summertime, it's the leaves are on the tree and it's giving us shade. So I also recommend overhangs if you're in the place where you can design your house. About a 3-foot overhang at ceiling height is very effective at keeping the sun out in the summertime, but still allowing the sun in the wintertime. We have that on some of our windows at our house. Is very effective. I'm amazed at how effective a simple architectural feature like a 3-foot overhang is. It really does lower your energy bills in the summertime for air conditioning and allows you to get that natural heat from the sun in the wintertime.
Okay, it looks like we have a question from earlier. So Doug says, while I'm all for clean energy, I'm concerned about the misconceptions around electric as the solution to fossil fuels and considerable future method of producing electricity. His understanding is that energy can't be created or destroyed, just altered, and there's a net loss of the energy that is used to alter it. I assume that is still true. If so, since most of our electricity is created from fossil fuels, isn't there a net expenditure of fossil fuels, fuel expense, to create the electric clean expense that we see and use?
Yeah, Doug, so you're exactly right. When you use electricity from the grid in Massachusetts, you are creating a carbon footprint by the production of that electricity. And in Massachusetts, our grid produces about 1 pound of carbon dioxide for every kilowatt hour you consume. So if you're using 10,000 kilowatt hours a year, you're roughly causing 10,000 pounds of carbon dioxide to be emitted. There's 2,000 pounds to a ton, so that's 5 tons of carbon dioxide. And those are incorporated in the numbers I just showed you about how many tons of carbon dioxide our house is emitting from both heating oil usage and from electricity usage. That's counting the carbon footprint emitted by the power stations to generate that electricity that we were using. However, when you replace that grid electricity with solar panel electricity, now you're generating your electricity with a 0 carbon footprint. It's not only much cheaper It's 5 to 8 cents per kilowatt hour for solar electricity. It was 23 cents, now 28, 29 cents for utility electricity in Massachusetts. That goes down from 28, 29 to 5 cents with solar panels. So you're not only having a massive reduction in the cost of your electricity, your carbon footprint from the electricity goes to zero as well, because you're now generating it from solar panels with a zero carbon footprint compared to generating at fossil fuel driven power stations that do have a carbon footprint.
David, how do we get that transition from the fossil fuel to the solar to be cost effective for the large majority of people? That's what I'm wrestling with all the time.
Right. Okay, so that's a very good question, Doug. This is you're gonna hit my geek funny bone here. We're gonna have to go off into a longer conversation, but roughly, solar power from large solar panel arrays, like solar panel arrays, acres and acres of solar panels are now much cheaper to make electricity from that than to make electricity from even natural gas fired power stations. And that was natural gas prices a year ago, not natural gas prices today. So large utility scale solar panel arrays are the cheapest way to make electricity without exception these days. Large wind farms are only slightly more expensive. Even large wind farms, both onshore and offshore, are cheaper than most fossil fuel power stations today. So it is now inevitable, in my opinion, because I believe the laws of economics really drive many, many things in our lives. It is now inevitable, with solar power and wind power being cheaper than fossil fuel electricity, that solar panels and solar electricity and wind electricity will dominate electricity production in Massachusetts. It's just going to take 20 years. That's the problem.
It should be faster than that, because it's now more expensive to build a new conventional power plant than a solar or wind plus battery backup.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Pamela. I didn't state that quite correctly. Doug was really asking about how do we make this happen for everyone? How do we lower everyone's electricity bill? Right now, people like all of you on this call, acting on your own home by putting solar panels on the roof, can get the cost of your electricity down, but doesn't get the cost of everyone else's electricity down. And the only way to get everyone else's cost of electricity down is to have massive investment in solar panel arrays, massive investment in wind power, either offshore and onshore. We're going to need a better grid because the sun doesn't always shine in Massachusetts. So we need to be able to import electricity from Arizona, where the sun does shine.
Well, but we can use battery backup. There's really neat new battery. You can liquefy the air and use that to store the solar and wind power when it's not working. And then when you like we do with liquid nitrogen and liquid LNG, natural gas. And the advantage to that is while you liquefy the air, you can remove the carbon from it. And building a power plant like that gets rid of the intermittency problem completely.
Yeah, there are quite a lot of different techniques for dealing with intermittency, as you described, Pamela. Batteries of any type is one way of doing it, whether it's that liquefied approach or just sort of standard lithium-ion batteries, which Tesla now makes in these mega pack size utility scale batteries. There's another very cheap way of storing electricity, which is called hydropower. And in Britain, I'm a Brit, so I know more about this. Britain has recently installed a huge undersea cable between Britain and Norway, because Norway has tons of fjords and they have tons of hydropower, and Britain now has a lot of wind power. And on some days, it generates far more power than it actually uses. So on those days, the excess wind power is sent across the cable to Norway, and they pump the water back uphill into the reservoirs. This is a giant battery. When the wind stops, you just turn the valve and the water flows back down again, turning the turbine, and you get electricity, and it comes across that cable back to Britain. Now that's a sort of unique circumstance between Britain and Norway, but just shows you that the economics of 500-mile long undersea cables are now very attractive. And I'm sure all of you have noticed it's only 200 miles between here and Canada. And Canada has tons of hydropower too. And so we can have a very similar arrangement between Massachusetts and Canada as Britain has between Britain and Norway, and it's a far shorter distance to go from Massachusetts to Canada. So one thing I would like to see at the Massachusetts level, and indeed at the country level really, is much better integration of the hydropower facilities we have today to become pumped storage, or really giant batteries that do not need any new infrastructure, don't need any mining of lithium or nickel or cobalt, just need to turn the switch on the turbines and pump the water uphill instead of allowing it to flow downhill from the reservoir. So I think that is actually the cheapest way to do battery storage. Are you disagreeing, Pamela?
Yeah, from what I've read, the sand pit batteries, making batteries out of dirt where it's stored in the form of heat, is very cheap. Also, the condensing air is also very cheap. It uses already well-tested and tried technology. The problem with hydropower is it is pretty environmentally destructive, even because it tends to make a bigger impact on the ecologies. We got a real problem with water.
Yeah, well, that is definitely true if you're building new dams. But if you're just using existing dams to store water and then release the water back again to run the turbines, I don't think it creates any significant environmental impact.
Pump water back out from the below the rivers back onto the above the dam.
Exactly.
David, General Tesla made a comment in an interview a few weeks ago that I happened to be listening to, that I think he was talking about the United States, could produce all of its electrical needs in approximately 100 square miles. And he said in Texas, he was talking a lot about ridiculous statement. Is that a conceivable statement?
No, I don't think it's ridiculous at all, actually, Doug. I'm not sure if 100 square miles is the right number, but let's just say it's something like that, right?
I'm sorry, 100 by 100, not 100 square
Oh, okay,
miles.
that's
100
more
by
like it.
100.
100 miles by 100 miles would be what, 10,000 square miles. That sounds more reasonable to me, because the only data point I have for comparison is I talked about that undersea cable from Britain to Norway. That's for like batteries for electricity storage. There is a second cable been commissioned but not yet built between Britain and Morocco. And Morocco's in the Sahara Desert. It's almost on the equator, and it's 2,000 miles from Britain. But a 2,000-mile undersea cable is going to be built from Morocco to Britain, and a 500 square mile solar panel field is going to be built in the Sahara Desert. 500 square miles. That's enough to supply 20% of Britain's electricity. So, America's about, I don't know, 10 times the size of Britain. So, I think you're talking about the right scale, like 100 miles by 100 miles, 10,000 square miles of solar panels would be enough to power the entire US. And I do not think it is infeasible. There are plenty of places in the US where, land is worthless because it's dry and desert-like. And there are places in Texas, Oklahoma, or Arizona, New Mexico. There's lots of places where land is really uninhabitable. There's not enough water there to grow crops. It's too hot. And yet this is the perfect location to be putting in hundreds of square miles of solar panels. The ones in Morocco, by the way, there's also naturally a very strong wind off the Atlas Mountains in Morocco. And so there are wind turbines going up with the solar panels. So now you've got wind and solar in the same location, and it's in the desert. No one cares. It's not an eyesore. No one cares what it looks like. And if anything, it's going to cool down the desert by absorbing all that energy from the sun. Perhaps, I'm speculating now, perhaps making the desert more amenable to wildlife, or to even growing crops under those solar panels. I'm speculating, okay, but I could see that in the future. And imagine doing that in Texas. You take the worst, most agriculturally terrible land there is. You put solar panels and wind turbines in. Nobody ever even sees it, and maybe it just cools off the desert enough you could actually start growing crops there. To me, this is sort of the brave new world where you can combine everything and really win on all counts. I see no drawbacks to that. The only problem is you need a grid that can take that electricity from where it's generated to where it's needed. And the places in the US where the land is cheap and sunny tend to be places where the population isn't. The population tends to be on the coasts, and that's a long way from the desert of Oklahoma and Texas and everything. But if Britain can afford to build a 2,000-mile cable to Morocco, the US can surely afford to build a 1,000-mile cable from Texas to Los Angeles.
Or
Hey,
we could
David,
use
this may
distributed
sound-
grid and do it like we do the internet with small packets that distributes the need without needing even storage.
That is the idea. A grid allows you to have, wind power where it's windy and solar power where it's sunny, and then distribute it around to wherever it's needed at that time of day.
With smart grids that do that automatically, like there's nothing in charge of, there's no big grid, switch for internet, and yet it works. We could do the same with power, apparently. I just put a link to a neat video I saw about that.
Great.
David, this may sound absolutely off the wall, but just thinking futuristically, when they discovered and started tapping and mass producing fossil fuels, and we are now highly dependent on them, I don't think anybody had the idea that we would be causing a problem environmentally by using fossil fuels. They come out of the ground. So what? Is it conceivable that by using so much solar and or so much wind that we could be upsetting the physics of our solar system, let's say? I just once in a while I wonder about that.
I think it's a good thing to speculate about, because I think you're exactly right. When people started digging oil out of the ground, they had no idea that it might come to some harm. The same thing with ozone, depleting chemicals, CFCs. They were just like propellants for even underarm deodorant. And yet they turned out to put holes in the ozone layer. So we don't really know. But I think the chances of us mucking up the physics of our planet is microscopic, because even the amount of sunlight we can, I think we need less than 1% of all of the solar power falling on our planet's surface to generate all the power, not just all the electricity, but all the energy we need. It is a really tiny fraction of the total energy impinging on the Earth's surface. And I think the same is true of wind. There's just so much wind on the planet. We can't possibly intercept more than a tiny fraction of it. So you may be right, Doug. You never know what happens when the butterfly in New York flaps its wings. There's a storm in Tokyo. You never know. But I'm not losing sleep over that. I'm losing far more sleep over health problems, over financial problems, particularly now with the cost increases in natural gas and electricity, and climate change, than I am about ruining the physics of the planet.
Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you so much to everyone who has joined us tonight. I really appreciate you all taking the time to be with us tonight. And for those who missed it earlier, I've recorded this program, and so hopefully in a few days I'll get it up on the library's YouTube page, which I will then send to David, and then he can send it out to everyone who has registered. And in terms of downloading the slides and stuff, I'm assuming that's also on your website, David, which I think you mentioned.
It's on the homepage of my website. So if you click that link that I think Sam circulated earlier, you get to my website. On the front page, you'll see that green zero carbon home green banner you saw on my opening slide. Just scroll down, keep scrolling down. You'll find several links there to the YouTube version of this, the recorded version of an earlier one with Q&A. You'll find a link to download the slides from tonight's webinar, including those 2 on questions for a heat pump installer, questions for a solar panel installer, and there's a bunch of other stuff on there as well. There's a link to the Q&A. So you can just go through the 300 questions that I've answered on the website. So there's tons of stuff you can get there, and the book download. You can get the book download there for free. Just type in the code DUX for Duxbury, and you'll get the book for free as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, David. I really appreciate your expertise and sharing your knowledge with us tonight. And thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. Have a great night.
You're very
Thank you,
welcome. Thanks,
David.
everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.